right. So welcome back, everyone, to the Inventing the Future podcast, where our mission is to inspire and empower entrepreneurs to solve the world's biggest problems. I have the honor of having my friend Daniel Dubois here on as my guest. And I actually met Daniel at a summit named the Abundance 360 Summit. And we were both fortunate enough to be given a scholarship to go to this tremendous summit based on entrepreneurship, the future, exponential technologies like AI, VR. So we're all geeks about that, and we're grateful to have met through there. So what's going on, Daniel? Great to have you on. How you doing today, man?
Yeah, thanks, Julian. Excited to be here. This should be fun.
Yes, we'll definitely make it so. Awesome. So as a quick outline, I'll start by giving a little bit of a bio and intro on Daniel. We'll then dive into his current venture, Key, and what the problem they're tackling there is and what the solution is in more detail. And then finally, we'll go through some startup lessons. Daniel's a serial entrepreneur and has a lot of nuggets of wisdom, I'm sure. So we'll dive into some of those lessons. But awesome. So starting off here, giving a quick introduction on Daniel. So Daniel is from Vancouver, and he moved to Toronto after starting and selling his last two venture-backed companies. He then joined Airbnb full-time, where he managed growth in top-tier markets. And then in 2019, Daniel took the leap of faith and left Airbnb to start Key, which is a novel co-equity fintech company that replaces a mortgage and allows someone to own a home for only $15,000. And we'll be diving into that. It's a super interesting model. Little more info. Key is home ownership as a service and provides a generation locked out of housing market with the benefits of home ownership and the freedoms of renting. So apart from that, Daniel's involved in super cool things, like he's participated as a G20 and B7 delegate, where he represented Canadian entrepreneurship, and has been invited for one-on-one meetings with world leaders such as Justin Trudeau, Prince William, and Kofi Annan. And finally, in college, Daniel spoke to 20,000 youth at We Day. He directed a film series on the sharing economy, which is what I think his first two ventures were based upon. It was the sharing economy. And then he also received a monthly grant from the Australian government to conduct research on the European sharing economy. So that's one of his areas of expertise. And yeah, apart from that, Daniel enjoys traveling for work, squeezing in time for spontaneous adventures, and he's even done a 100-kilometer race along the Great Wall. Wow, that sounds like some David Goggins shit right there.
Yeah, we can take this conversation any direction you'd like to go. It's funny that the 100K in China doesn't often come up, but it was an adventure of a lifetime, especially since it was spontaneous. And some people ask, was it like a bicycle race? But it was on foot. There was no breaks. It took 27 hours, and it was through the mountains. Wow. So anyone who's been to the Great Wall of China is definitely not flat. But yeah, regarding the sharing economy at the time was called collaborative consumption. And I know that you were interested in maybe diving into how to start a company. It was really difficult trying to start a company in the sharing economy space because it was so novel, and it was the rise of these marketplaces of underutilized assets that we didn't even have a name for it at the time, right? So yeah, where would you like to start? Happy to dive deeper into my earlier entrepreneurial endeavors and what it was like trying to start a business at the time. And for anyone listening that wants to get started, I'm sure we can make it hopefully a little bit easier for them.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I love that. And yeah, this 100-kilometer race definitely sounds insane. I love those sorts of experiences, especially the spontaneity behind it. And so yeah, I'd love to get into the your early experience with your ventures, just starting off. I think first I'd love to dive a little bit into Key first and your journey as an entrepreneur, and then I think it'd be great to highlight some of those entrepreneurial lessons from your first ventures. So just kind of getting started off here, I'm curious what got you interested in entrepreneurship, and why did you then decide to become an entrepreneur? Like, you could have easily gotten a high paying job or stayed at Airbnb, more stability, easier life. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, and so
definitely easier life. Yeah, you know what? I've always been an entrepreneur. It's in my DNA. My earliest entrepreneurial memory was when I was 5 years old. I used to go and pick moss on the train
selling
tracks
moss.
by where I grew up, and I used to go and sell that door to door for $5 a bag. So my cost of goods sold was zero, right? I'd just go and pick it off the train tracks, and I didn't even know what entrepreneurship was, but I loved the hustle. Throughout my entire elementary school, I would sell Kool-Aid on the Vancouver seawall. People would complain about price, whether if it was 25 cents or, whatever I'd price it at, there would be someone who would complain. So I switched up my strategy. I said, pick your own price. And instantly I had people that were naturally giving more. And so I realized the strategy behind entrepreneurship as
Interesting.
well. So at one point in time, I even had other people in my community working for me, other kids, and multiple Kool-Aid stands all across the seawall. What else? I started a clothing line when I was in grade 6. I was messing around on Microsoft Paint. It's funny because I'm always considered the young entrepreneur, but I don't know if you're old enough to remember Microsoft Paint. Have you ever used
Oh
it
yeah,
before?
no, I've used
Yeah.
it
Okay.
even in its primitive days, but it still feels
Nice.
somewhat primitive.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I designed my logo, my initials on Microsoft Paint, and being in grade 6, I thought it would be cool to have my initials embroidered into my clothing. I don't know exactly why it was a draw for me at the time, but I just love to create, and went into a wholesale company and tried to see if I could actually have my logo embroidered, and they laughed at me. They thought it was cute. Grade 6 wanting to build a bit of a custom clothing line. They said that they only do wholesale, but I could buy wholesale and start an apparel business. And I think it was more of a joke than anything else, but I thought it was a great idea. So it's exactly what I did. And instead of going door to door selling moss, I was going door to door selling t-shirts, hats, jackets, doing pop-up shops in the Vancouver seawall instead of selling Kool-Aid. When I got into high school, I thought I wouldn't be cool anymore if I had a clothing line. The pressures of being in a big high school, and once you're bit with the entrepreneurial bug, and when you have entrepreneurship in your DNA, there's no turning back, right? So in grade 9, I started a second clothing line, much more serious, different sales reps in different schools, a fun lifestyle brand. It was truly a brand, which was a lot of fun. My first time actually creating something that stood for something bigger than myself. Lots of different other initiatives. When I was 18, I started a laneway housing company. So we converted garages to small homes, and we completely transformed an alleyway from, alleyways are traditionally not the nicest places to be, into these micro communities. It's just, there's still so much potential in that underutilized space. When I graduated college, I backpacked Australia for 6 months. Just
Love
absolute trip of a lifetime. Couch surfed almost the entire time
that.
while we were there, just staying with different families. Experienced this incredible lifestyle where we'd wake up in the morning, go surfing with the dad, or bike trips with the neighbors of wherever we were staying. And it was amazing because we had nothing, yet we had access to anything we could ever want. Right? We had community. We had access to surfboards, as I mentioned, right? And it made me want to create that same experience that I felt in Australia, not only for other travelers, but here at home in my own backyard. And I was in a entrepreneurship course, actually, my first year of university. And I was sitting in the back of the class watching this TED talk that they showed in this class, and it was called "The Rise of Collaborative Consumption" by Rachel Botsman. It's actually being renamed to "The
Wow.
Rise of the Sharing Economy." And I remember just having head to toe goosebumps watching this talk. It was, there's only a few tens of thousands of views. It was before the virality of the hype cycle that the sharing economy went through. But I was just blown away. I went to all my professors asking, how can I learn more about the so-called collaborative consumption? And no one knew what it was, right? I started thinking about creating a marketplace where people could share skills together. They could learn new languages, and they can
Wow.
connect with their neighbors. I started thinking about the life cycle of some of the stuff that we own. Like the average amount of time that a drill is in use is under 15 minutes, yet half the households in North America own a drill, right? And you don't need to own a drill. You just need access to be able to use the drill to, put a hole in the wall or whatever the use case might be, right? Mm-hmm. So that was a lot of fun. I actually, you talked about directing a film series in my intro. That's how I hacked my education, if you will. I actually contacted Airbnb when they were just a startup, leadership at companies like Google and Facebook, the first ever co-housing company, the first ever co-working space where the Twitter hashtag was created. And I drove from Vancouver to San Francisco in a day. It's a big drive. It's 17 hours. And connected with a film crew and interviewed all these leaders at the time to not only educate myself and build a network when I was, 21 years old, but also to educate the world about this movement that was taking place, this small startup called Airbnb, and how it's going to transform the way that we think about our home and open it up to the world, just like I experienced in Australia. So that was a lot of fun. There's many different iterations of that company, and we became venture backed, and we went through the whole cycle of growing a tech company, and ended up at my dream company, Airbnb, that I followed along since the very beginning. And then I saw the need for Key, and left Airbnb to build out Key. One thing that I'll mention, and you mentioned this in my bio, speaking at We Day, that was when I was in college. We Day is the most incredible event. I don't know if you've seen much about it, but 20,000 youth packed in a stadium, and you can't buy a ticket to We Day. It's like going to a Tony Robbins conference, but you have to actually earn the ticket through service. So raising money for charity or volunteering at nonprofits. So the expression of like blow the roof off, it really comes from an event like that. That's where you had people like Kofi Annan, you had Martin Luther King III, you had Magic Johnson, you had the Dalai Lama, and Macklemore, and all these incredible speakers that were there, all focused on using our time and energy to put a dent in the universe. So after that event, I've always been an entrepreneur. You asked why choose entrepreneurship? Like I said, it's in my DNA. I love to create. I love to build. But after that event, I made a commitment to myself that I'm only going to put my time and energy into projects that move society forward, that truly put a dent in the universe, and that are a part of something bigger than myself. So at Airbnb, I learned a ton. We grew a ton. It was one of the fastest growing companies of all time. I had a role with a ton of autonomy, and just was having an absolute blast. Was traveling all around the world, staying in beautiful homes, and was learning about growth hacking and all the great stuff that is powerful for entrepreneurship. But witnessing firsthand the generational crisis that we have in home ownership, and seeing the potential of actually addressing this generational crisis and the ripple effect that it has when people aren't displaced and they actually are able to own in their community and put roots down, and the well-documented psychological aspects of actually being an owner, and being an owner without forfeiting your freedom, and just seeing this 1,000-year-old system that's just highly inefficient. So I actually brought this idea of Key, which we can dive into, but I brought it to someone who I look up to, a close mentor of mine who ran multifamily at Airbnb. He came up to me the next day and he's like, when you're in back-to-back meetings and every 30 minutes you have to change your mindset for whatever topic the meeting is. He's like, I was driving home and I just couldn't shake this idea. I brought it up to one of the co-founders at Airbnb the other day, or the next day. 2 days later, we had another one-on-one meeting. And all of a sudden within Airbnb, there's all this internal buzz. The co-founder Airbnb said, let's put together a bi-weekly sync on this idea to track its progress and bring in other leadership within the company. And Airbnb is not going to build out Key. It's just like such a moonshot. It's so hard to create a business like this. But they would definitely partner with a company that's getting this off the ground, right? It could be a natural win-win. So with the blessing of Airbnb, I left to build this out full time, and connected with my co-founder in a very in just such a small world, just serendipity. The way one of my first investor actually is an LP in his fund, and he's been thinking about this for over 5 years and has over $2 billion worth of real estate in his pipeline to do something interesting with. So, yeah.
Wow. So, Daniel, oh my God, there's so many directions we can take this in. And all of it is fascinating. And I love how the build of the story, it's like one thing logically builds up to the next. And it's very clear how the path kind of drew itself out to where you are now. A few things I'll highlight is I think from really interesting to learn early on about the lemonade stand where you ask people to name their own price. That's like kind of like testing business models and testing human psychology of reciprocity. And the other thing that stood out to me is when you first realize that one of your businesses turned into something greater than yourself. And I think that's one of the reasons I love entrepreneurship so much and business, because I feel like a business is an extension of myself. It's an extension of my mission, right? You're able to serve more people through it. And that's kind of like an early lesson that came to you as you were doing something more scalable. So I love that. And it also sounds like one of the keys in your success there was the networking capabilities that opened up to you once you became more of an expert or well-versed in the sharing economy. That kind of like sounds like it opened a lot of opportunities, which led you to the networking that probably got you the Airbnb gig, and then later helped you expose the opportunity for Key. But wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on the business point that you mentioned, being able to have an extension of your mission,
Mm-hmm.
for me, business is very much just that, right? It's the values of the company are an extension of the values that you hold, right? And using those values as a filter in whatever decision that you make, who you want to do business with, whether that be investors, coworkers, partners, right? And really reverse engineering exactly the lifestyle that you want to create, the impact that you want to have in the world, and using business as a tool to help get you there or get the world there. And the other aspect regarding network, network it's something that I didn't have growing up, or like a mentor that necessarily exposed it to me. It was just through sheer founder will of trying to figure it out. Going to San Francisco, I used to cold call people on Google, just saying like, "Hey, I have this marketplace idea," or I probably didn't even call it a marketplace. I have this website idea. Trying to just type web development Vancouver, hundreds of phone calls, and eventually someone passed me on to another person who is a designer and who's just doesn't usually come up in conversation, but he was like truly one of my first mentors, where I got together with this guy and just loved what I was trying to create, and saw that I was spinning my tires and lost and didn't know where to start. I knew nothing about the lean startup. I knew nothing about business model canvas. I was in business school, but business school teaches you to be a good manager, if anything, right? It doesn't actually teach you how to build a company. So he actually designed a logo for me and made some other intros. And all you need is one intro. You just need one person who's connected or in the inner circle or understands how to build a company, and the rest is history. There's a few programs that I received access to. One is called the Global Student Entrepreneurship Awards that I went through, which is hosted by EO. EO's the largest founder network in the world of 14,000 global members, all making $1 million USD or more in revenue. And that absolutely changed my trajectory in many ways. And the other one was a program at the time. It was called The Next Big Thing. There was only 2 years of this program in existence. It was almost like the Canadian version of the Thiel Fellowship. And that was amazing. That was a program that truly gave me my start. Even though I already spoke at We Day, I had like all these other aspects that looked like I had a bunch of momentum, but I still didn't understand how to build a business. And we were reading 3 books a month. The first book that we had to read was A Lean Startup, and it just blew my mind. It was like, the idea that you can validate a business in hours, not months, to be able to get off the ground, right?
Yeah, no, that changed the model of everything, especially in our dynamic and fast-moving pace world. Yeah, but that's super fascinating how it all built up to that point and eventually got to Key. So awesome. Let's actually dive a little further into Key. So I'm curious if you could briefly describe what you guys do and also why you do what you do, what the mission there is at a higher level.
Yeah, let's start with that. So in Toronto, on average, it takes 21 years to save up for a down payment. 21 years. It used to take 4 years. In Vancouver, where I'm from, where most of the people that I grew up with no longer live because they've been displaced, it takes 29 years to save up for a down payment. So you graduate college, you're not going to be able to own even an entry level condo until you're in your late 40s, right? It's just the amount of foreign investment and the amount of these systemic challenges that we have in the housing crisis and the housing crisis in probably 50 to 100 cities around the world are changing the entire landscape of cities right now. So young people like us, we have two options, right? One is to rent. Most people are stuck on the proverbial rental treadmill, right? Where your income isn't going up the same rates as housing prices. So you're getting further and further away from ever being able to actually own. Because 21 years, that's changing every year, right? It's actually getting further and further out of reach. And then the other side of that, so if you're not locked out of the market renting and you're able to actually qualify for a mortgage, usually it's from the support of the bank of mom and dad. You have to have a big enough down payment to actually get into the market. Plus, you have to be able to maintain a certain lifestyle to service your debt, right? To actually pay down your mortgage. So then everyone's house poor and you're truly locked in, right? So with Key, we're unlocking a new model for home ownership. We actually raise large pools of passive investor capital that have been locked out of participating in condo, which I can dive deeper into, but large institutional capital that have no way right now to invest in this asset class. That's one of the best performing real estate asset classes there is. And we leverage that money to support local owner residents to own a home years sooner. So just to dive in a layer deeper there, we raise, let's say, 50% equity from the Harvard Endowment Fund. We leverage that up with an additional 50% debt. We buy entire buildings or individual suites of condos. And then we allow someone to move in with just 2.5% of the value of their suite. So now they're able to own a home with around $15,000. And every month they're able to choose if they want to buy up or sell down their equity position. And the more equity they own, the less rent they pay.
It's proportional.
Exactly. So if you own $100,000 worth of equity and your suite's worth $400,000, you'd be receiving a 25% discount on what would be market rent. But you can choose every month. Do you receive a bonus or an inheritance, or you have some additional dry powder that you want to put to work? You can put that into your suite. That immediately starts compounding and growing in value with whatever the real estate market's doing. Or you can sell 20 grand worth of equity and go travel the world or fund your wedding. So the central innovation here is that there is no mortgage. So no one's locked into this long-term debt environment where you're paying years more interest than principal of your home. And there's a ton of, as I mentioned, just systemic ripple effects of this model. Including right now, I was talking to a developer in Vancouver. He said if he sold 300 units, 295 of them he's selling in Asia. And a lot of those units are sitting empty. They're just now like a really strong safe haven for money. And cities have tried to regulate this with foreign investor, or not just foreign investor, but empty home tax, which is great if you could actually properly regulate empty homes, but it's like extremely difficult, right? But yeah, with our model, we actually can leverage passive investor capital to help local owner residents. And create a world where real estate. Highlight, yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, and to highlight there, kind of the key differentiation is that the way I understood it is that when you buy a home, it's either like it's binary, like either you own the home or you don't, right? And if you own it, then you'd probably have to like pay a down payment and get some debt, get a mortgage and pay off the debt over time. But Key's model is unique in that it's not a binary solution. It's somewhere in between. So you could, for example, instead of owning 100% of a house, you could own 20% of a house or 25%, right? And you could either buy more equity. It's like, oh, I want to buy 10% more of this house today. Or you could sell your equity. It's like, oh, I kind of need money. Maybe I'll sell 5-10% of my house, or I want to move out, sell it all completely, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's real estate is so binary right now, right? And it's so polarizing because it's hard to know, should I buy, should I rent? And you have so many conflicting different views. And it's not like we have this crazy obsession with home ownership that's not necessarily healthy. It doesn't always make sense to own a home. And rentals can be viewed as like the rental treadmill, this negativity towards renting, but renting's not always a bad thing, right? Renting is actually can make a lot of sense. It can make sense to rent a place instead of owning a place and investing in a REIT or deploying your capital in different ways, right? But there's not too many, especially millennials or other generations that are really thinking about risk-adjusted return profile for or portfolio for investing in real estate, right? So we're just making it super easy. It's almost like Wealthfront. We've built all the technology to digitize the home buying process. So here's something I should have opened up with because this is super fascinating. We talked about 21 years on average to save up for a down payment in Toronto, right? Just a case in point is we had someone the other week who is a young Black Instacart shopper. She's a single mom. And she was able to buy a home pulled over on the side of the road on her iPhone, start to finish in 15 minutes with $15,000. So that's unheard of, right? Mm-hmm. There's we've digitized, we've integrated with Plaid, KYC, AML, we verify bank balance. We do all digital signing of the documentation. And we even have full virtual walkthroughs all on your phone or your laptop, right? So,
wow.
So yeah.
So sorry to come in here. This isn't just about a model that helps home ownership become more accessible, but it's also about the experience here. Like I don't know. I haven't bought a home, but I don't know if there's other services or platforms or models through which you can buy a home in 15 minutes, given all the paperwork, being able to kind of make the decision and get everything cleared in that amount of time.
Yeah, and it's and you mentioned experience. It's not just the user experience or the user interface that we've created in this very elegant way of being able to digitize everything instead of weeks or months of lawyers and real estate agents and brokers and everyone else involved in the process. But when we think about experience, we think about what we're working towards, which I guess just to take a step back, we talked about the impact that entrepreneurship has and our values and an extension of our mission. Our mission is to create a world where real estate is a source of freedom and prosperity for everyone. So when we talk about prosperity, it's not just financial prosperity, and not just being a transactional business of here's how you can own a home and 2.5%, and this is what happens when you buy up or sell down your equity. It's truly social prosperity as well. So the experience, the reach of the experience is so much bigger than just the financial model behind it, right? Yeah. If we can actually leverage large pools of institutional capital to buy entire buildings, then we can actually get involved in the design of those buildings. We can have rooftop patio in all of our buildings. We can have Soho House or Equinox or different amenities. We can do curated dinner events and really systemically build community in, actually address belonging within these environments, and then actually extend outside of the brick and mortars of our actual buildings and into the community, right? We can incentivize buying behaviors to support local shops, where if you shop at a specific grocery store, you can receive, 1 or 2% back in equity. So every time you shop somewhere that's one of our local partners, you actually immediately have more equity in your account, which means that value is compounding with the real estate market. Plus, you're paying less rent the next month because you have more equity in your account. So there's just crazy economic flywheels that we can create. If you want to go a layer deeper,
go for it.
When I was at Airbnb, I witnessed firsthand the challenges of regulations on their business model. So cities are regulating, So they were going to a principal residence only. So unless you actually live there, you can't short-term rental your place. And then buildings were regulating. So HOAs, stratas, condo boards, depending on where in the world you live. Almost all HOAs were saying minimum night stays 30 days or 3 months, right? Just like Airbnb's banned. And I've experienced this firsthand as a traveler. I've stayed in over 100 Airbnbs in just over a year. So it's almost on average like a different Airbnb every 3 days, right? Many times just every day, different Airbnb.
That's fun.
So that's like you meet someone in an alleyway, or you meet someone that has to like drive you into their parking lot to take you up the elevator. Staying in condos can be a really poor experience, even though you have most of the supply in condos in top tier cities, right? So with Key, we actually, because we control we are the condo board. There is no volunteer-based amateur board managing this billion-dollar asset. We are the board. We make them all short-term rental friendly, and we actually take over management of those suites. So as an owner resident, you just let us know the dates you're out of town. We'll do a rev share with you, but we'll also coordinate with the guests, coordinate with the cleaners, safe storage of personal belongings, and allow people to make money while they travel in their suite in a way that's truly home sharing. And then on the guest experience side, we can actually address creating a sense of belonging for those guests. When they show up, they're welcomed. It's not like they have to hide or tell the concierge that they're a friend, they're a family member, or, anything like that. So there's so many different layers to the experience side that we can create.
Wow, that's I think one really interesting lesson there is not only what will this model or this solution enable as the first order consequence, like basically in your case with Key, the direct impact is that people are able to own homes at a much lower cost and with equity. But then it's also thinking like, what would that sort of solution enable? And so you start to see the second, third, fourth order consequences of what this model enables. And all of that in aggregate is really the scope of the impact that a solution this unique is able to have. So love to see that level of thinking.
Yeah, it is. It is very, you nailed it. It's very much, I think it can be overwhelming, this idea, because of the different layers, right? It's like, even talking to investors, I don't bring up the Airbnb side. I don't bring up the infrastructure where we could actually have integrations with someone like Soho House, or Uber Eats having cloud kitchens in our infrastructure, or having a grid set up where, if you think about, even from an energy stack perspective, you have a misalignment of interest right now between a developer and the end consumer. So a developer, just to go back to first principles for a second to understand how real estate works in North America, actually mostly globally right now, is you have a developer who's almost like a shot caller, if you will. They raise money from high net worth individuals, so $100,000 to $500,000 checks on average. Then with enough equity, they'll launch a pre-sale program. They get enough pre-sales that they sell to mostly now 50% local investors, 50% foreign investors. 10 years ago, it was almost 100% owner residents. Now it's pretty much 100% investors. Once they have enough pre-sales, they go to the bank and they unlock financing. Then they build as quickly as possible. Then they unlock their pre-sales once they've built the building. They return the capital to investors on a building by building basis. So every building's siloed. They wash their hands of it, and then they move on to the next building. So if you're the Harvard Endowment Fund, just because I used their name earlier, your minimum check size is $100 million, yet you can't own more than 5% of a portfolio. So unless you actually consolidate $2 billion worth of an asset class, you can't unlock most of these large pools of patient capital. So that's the first sort of thesis, is we're turning condo into a commercial asset class to leverage long-term patient capital. The other side is so outside of just like the passive investor side, if you think about the developer experience, there's a ton of time, costs, and hassles involved in working with high net worth individuals. So the way that happens is it's usually outsourced to a broker. They make 2,000 phone calls to be able to get enough equity to start. So they're paying 5% to the broker. Then they launch the pre-sales, as I mentioned. That's sales, marketing, working with real estate brokers, whatnot. And then there's finance costs because of, investors that are buying 10 units. So we can go to a developer, we can be one single signature and we'll buy an entire building, and we can save the developer up to 15% in non-marginal costs. And we can save them a bunch of time on top of it. So we're actually an engine for developers to be able to move so much quicker and build more. So now we're able to receive real estate, top tier real estate at a discount because of some of the money that we save developers. And then there's another really important third piece here. So we talked about mobilizing institutional capital. We talked about the incentives for the developer. Now the third piece here is the alignment of interest between the developer and the end consumer. So developers right now, they don't put in geothermal as an example. They don't put in LED lighting for the most part because it has a 3-year payback and they only run the lights for, a year and a half. So that's really challenging from a sustainability standpoint. That's part of the reason why I even started Key. Al Gore came to Airbnb, talked to our team, and he said that 30% of all carbon emissions in the United States is from concrete. I had no idea. Concrete, right? Like
that's insane.
The environmental impact of building right now and how unsustainable we're building, because typically we're building to minimum standards. So if we can actually, a developer doesn't maintain paying the energy bills once they return the capital to investors and they're on to the next project. So by us actually being not only partnering with the developer, but actually being the owner for an infinite time horizon, it allows us to put in geothermal. It allows us to invest in LED lighting and more sustainable infrastructure. And then from my co-founder's perspective, when I connected with him and we started to jam on this idea, the straw that broke the back for him was very much the affordability crisis. Was very much, we see it in the news on a daily basis right now. There's headlines constantly around just people being locked out of the market. So, truly, if it feels like one of these business ideas, if it's not us with my experience in the sharing economy, marketplaces, Airbnb, and real estate, which I haven't dove much into on this podcast, and my co-founder being a pioneer in SaaS, started the second SaaS-based company in North America, took it public in the NASDAQ in 98, started many interesting initiatives, and then became one of the top venture capitalists. And his partner in his venture capitalist firm was a developer who built $7 billion worth of condos in Toronto. So it's kind of like, if we don't do this, we talk about taking a leap and leaving my dream job to start this. It was like, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when, right?
Yeah. And then at that point, you feel like you have like almost no choice but to do something about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's funny. So, oh man, I love this story and the depth behind it. Again, it's like everything that this solution implies is all part of the benefit and uniqueness of it too. So Daniel, one last question here with Key before we move on to some of the startup lessons. My big question here is like, this is such a unique model. It seems obvious in retrospect, probably, right? It's like, why didn't that exist before? But how do you come up with an idea like this? Like, it's so, things have been done so traditionally, and then this model is like, we don't need the binary system. Here's something in between. Own your equity. Like, how does an idea like that come to surface? Where does it come?
Yeah, I think, ideas typically are taking two seamlessly sort of unrelated objects and bringing them together to create something magical, right? To create something new. So for me, my cousin and I, we actually bought land. This is while I was doing ShareShed. This is while I was starting my last company and, focused on tech. My last 10 years have all been tech for the most part. But from that laneway housing company that I started with my cousin at 18, we ended up buying land. We got it rezoned. We went through the development process, financing process, 198 unit residential development that we're building. It's currently in construction. So I witnessed firsthand the time, costs, and hassles involved in real estate. So we'll now park that conversation. At Airbnb, I saw firsthand, and I bought Bitcoin in 2012 and been dabbling in that space ever since. I witnessed firsthand the hype cycles of blockchain. and the promise to decentralize marketplace and to be able to exchange value. So I actually put together a cross-functional team at Airbnb. We were a team of 7. We worked on a number of really interesting initiatives, but one was looking at, will there ever be a platform shift for marketplaces to be able to interact peer-to-peer on a trustless basis, right? So then looking at the rise of security tokens, this is in 2017, I started to think through how powerful would it be if we could actually democratize real estate investing, right? If we can have something like Wealthfront in the United States, where it's so easy to buy ETF now and have access to the public markets, there's still not an easy way to have access to real estate investing. And there are REITs, there's many different ways to invest, but like show me a millennial that invests in REITs that doesn't work in real estate finance. It just like doesn't exist. So there's, for this specific idea for Key, there's been so many different layers, as I mentioned, seeing the impact of regulations at Airbnb, thinking through true home sharing, seeing all the conversations around displacement, and seeing the rise of entrepreneurs that are signing leases and then just subleasing them or short-term rentaling them full time, and imagining just abundantly, thinking about what would it look like if we had entire home ownership ecosystems where home sharing was allowed? Like, what would true home sharing look like? And how powerful could that be instead of, hotel association fighting short-term rental groups? What if we could just, redesign a city in a way that actually made people feel that sense of a belonging? So ideas, I think, evolve. Even if looking at Key, the way that Key started, there's been so many different iterations, and it's really a matter of just taking the first step and testing and iterating and learning as quickly as possible. And it does matter what idea you start with. I've heard people talk about what matter what idea it is, just like get started and then it will evolve from there. I think you want to, really think through what industry especially that you want to commit to, because, it's a 10 plus year commitment, really getting something off the ground that's meaningful, at least something that's worth doing, right?
Absolutely. No, and that's one of the core ideas of this podcast, is that when you come up with an idea that's solving a massive problem, something that's worth it for you, then that's really what fills you with the energy and perseverance that you need to bring it into fruition. Because if something's not worth it, you're vulnerable to giving up prematurely and really easily. So I agree. The 10-year rule is a great framework for thinking like, am I willing to dedicate 10 years of my life to solving this problem? Because if you're not, then don't waste your time trying to do it and failing early.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember someone who spoke to our group at the Next Big Thing, and he just, he was like, just be so I think we just caught him maybe on a bad day, but very successful. Most people listening to this show would know who he is. And he just mentioned, be very careful in what industry you start in, because he's like, I don't know if it was actually worth me sacrificing my 20s to be involved with the industry that I unintentionally stepped into. And I will say real estate's a really interesting market. In tech, what's so amazing about tech is there's this notion of a rising tide lifts all boats. All conversations end with, what can I do to help you? What's your biggest challenge right now? It's all about, it feels like we're all on the same team in tech. The best way to, the best investors in the world, the way that they measure their success is the founder's first phone call, if something goes good or bad, is it to them? It's like this idea of just like being a good person, which is great. In real estate, there's a bit more of a scarcity mindset. There's a lot of, I guess real estate by definition is finite, right? So I think it's been really fascinating working now in real estate and tech. Like most of our investors are fintech investors. It's around, building the technology to eliminate a conventional mortgage. But we also don't want to come into real estate, guns a-blazing, trying to be a disruptor. We actually feel like we are the rising tide that lifts all boats. So we are an economic engine for developers to do more. We are mobilizing real capital that hasn't been able to participate in the past. And then especially for realtors, which we work really closely with, I've seen a lot of people give the pitch where it's like, look at how much money realtors make every year in the United States. If we could take 1% of this market, this is how big of a company we are, right? It's like most people roll their eyes at that narrative because you just see it too much. For us, we actually have an investment from the National Association of Realtors, second most powerful lobby group in the United States, next to the National Rifle Association. But they invested because you have realtors who have most of their leads now locked out of the market. So we actually work with realtors, really thinking holistically about this industry, where we can say, instead of telling your leads that don't qualify, instead of saying drive till you qualify or come back to me later, now you can empower them to own a home years sooner. You can almost keep that lead warm, if you will. You can help them build equity. And once they're ready to go buy the white picket fence or traditional home, then we've warmed them up for that, right? So, I think a lot of the talk is, for us, it's a lot less about disruption and more around innovation and providing value.
That's the essential piece right there. And I think from a strategic point of view, it's kind of like looking at the key stakeholders, right? You have the realtors, you have the developers, you have the homeowners, and kind of figuring out like where does the opportunity exist and how do these different pieces function? What are the pain points of each of the key stakeholders? And that kind of like helping you define a path through which you can play. So I like that. Cool. So Daniel, as a final piece here for these last couple of minutes, let's go back to where we had kind of touched upon at the beginning. You've had 2 venture-backed startups that you've sold. Now you're on your 3rd one with Keem. I'm curious, when you were at that point where you were starting off as an entrepreneur, how do you think about that? Like, where do you go from there? You had a mentor, he guided you in some ways. So I'm curious from that perspective, where do you go from there? You have like an idea that you want to bring into execution, but you don't really know where to go, where to start, what's important, what's not. Yeah. How would you approach that from that point of view?
So as we talked about earlier, how I was just cold calling people on Google, web development Vancouver, that's not the right approach, right? It was just, that comes from me not of ignorance, just not knowing how to start a company, right? And it at least helped me find my first mentor. But even that mentor knew nothing about the lean startup. He helped me design a logo and make some other intros for me. But it wasn't until I actually got into a bit of the inner circle, if you will, of the venture world, that I could understand how to build a business. Once it was truly reading the book, The Lean Startup, just understanding that that as founders, our job is to validate or disprove our idea as quickly as possible. So, as an example, one of my investors is one of my first investors and closest mentors is Ryan Holmes, who started Hootsuite, which is a big Canadian success story. And he wrote an article called The Ode to the Lean Startup. And it's a great little article that talks about if he was starting a water company today, he wouldn't go and like source where the water is going to come from and buy the water rights and then start conversations with bottling companies and try to find out like what bottles are the most sustainable and if you should do like, cardboard packaging or plastic or like a PET alternative, everything else involved in distribution and partnerships with companies that are, grocery stores or whatever else. He would simply go to Unbounce. He'd create a landing page. He'd put $100 worth of ads behind the landing page and he'd A/B test, water that makes you sexier or water that makes you healthier or water that's environmentally friendly or, mineral added water, whatever it might be. Next thing you know, you could actually have an idea of what's the best, customer acquisition cost and who's most interested, what type of user archetypes are most interested in your product, right? So that's maybe a very simple example of, a water company. Water is something that obviously has been done a million times, but with so many different takes. I'll give you a real example now. My wife is a psychotherapist. So she's a counselor and coach. She's done very well with executive coaching now, and loves her job and loves being able to help flip the switch and give clarity to people's lives. And she looks at people very holistically, right? Being the best version of yourself inside and outside of work. She was at one point in time, I came home and I was like, I swear we have the same job. Me leading a company, a lot of my one-on-ones with staff is around just seeing how they're doing. I had one of the executives at Airbnb, I asked him for leadership advice, and he said the best leaders are people who actually care. So caring about your team outside of just performance. It's not about like trying to get the most out of people.
Yeah.
It's about supporting them. Yeah, it's about like empowering them to chase their potential. So Lucy, my wife, was like, how cool would it be to have a role like what she does with executive coaching or counseling and psychotherapy, but not just for executives? What if there was actually companies like Airbnb that would have coaches that would provide one-on-one, because it's the most powerful one-on-one, and then with some group dynamics, but one-on-one is the most powerful for breakthrough. It feels the safest, but to all staff. So I told her, I was like, hey, if you think that's interesting, I'm sure there's some other strong coaches that might find that fascinating as well. So instead of investing a ton of time into starting a company in this space, what she did is she posted a bunch of job ads on a few different platforms. Within a week, she had over 800 applicants. And these are like double PhD, head of coaching at university like Stanford. And she was just like blown away with the quality of applicants. So she validated that other coaches are interested in providing coaching to all staff within high growth venture backed companies. We then put together just a Squarespace site that she built. And then I reached out to some companies in the ecosystem that I know, some founders that I'm friends with, made some intros, and within first couple weeks, she onboarded her first company. So she hired the top 3% of coaches and counselors, and then was able to place those counselors in these companies to provide virtual one-on-one coaching for all staff. So it's just an example of like, it's so much easier to just to focus on validating. And for that idea, it's two sides, right? There's supply, which are coaches and counselors, which she validated first, and then demand, which is just from conversations.
I love that.
Fast forward, and this is like the ultimate COVID model, but like she just onboarded yesterday a company of 400 staff, and the rest is history. So I think it's all about just getting started. Landing pages are powerful. The lean startup and business model canvas is probably the best tool. I know for this idea, for Inward, what we did is in a Saturday afternoon, we did a full business model canvas, and we had the entire strategy of what we needed to validate, right?
Yeah.
So hopefully that's helpful. And if anyone wants any advice or support or intros, I'm always happy to help. And Julian, you can put any of your listeners in contact with me.
Cool. Yeah, no, thank you for offering that. I love that. And I think one of the keys there is realizing that when you have when you're kind of validating an idea, you can prototype very low fidelity ideas. Just basically, it's like, clarify, what don't I know? What do I know? What are my assumptions? And how can I validate them? So in that case, it was like, hey, there's two big sides of the market. There's supply and demand here. And both have assumptions. We have assumptions about what these people want or don't want, or what their problems or pain points are. And then the next question is, how can I test and validate these assumptions as quick as possible and with as low cost as possible? Many people think the first model or version of their product has to be code or a fully fleshed out product, but really, like, you can get creative in how low fidelity you can get in your prototype to test and validate these ideas. And those were great examples from the stories you just told. So yeah. Daniel, two quick last questions in like 30 seconds to a minute. I'm curious, if you were to go back in time to when you first started your first company, younger Daniel, what advice would you give your younger self? What did you wish you knew at that point?
I think exactly what we were just talking about. Maybe I have a bit of a recency bias because
Yeah.
we finished talking about the lean startup, but it would be not putting so much pressure on myself. I remember and pressure on myself to have something that's like perfect, right? The feedback is probably the same thing that kind of rocked me when I was touring Facebook, 10 plus years ago, in college and doing the film series where there's a poster on the wall on Facebook that said done is better than perfect, right?
Hmm.
It's not about launching something that's super buttoned down. It's a matter of actually building a community and validating, right?
Yep.
So yeah, that would be the feedback.
That's what it's all about. Yeah. And one thing I was going to mention is I highly recommend, apart from the lean model canvases, business model canvases, which really everyone should do, and they're really short, is design thinking. Because design thinking is all about validating your ideas. You go from empathizing with your users to learn about the problem. Then you go and define the problem itself. And once you have clarity on what the problem is, you can start to ideate, generate ideas on how to solve it. And then you build a prototype, a low fidelity prototype. And then finally, you can go out and test it. And depending on how things go, you either need to go back and empathize to the first step and talk with users, or you can start to actually build out and incubate the idea and take it to the next level. So yeah, that's all a process. There's many tools at your disposal, but all of these are important to keep in mind to help you move quickly and really disrupt. So yeah, with that, Daniel, the last question I want to ask you here is to kind of wrap it all up, and as an aggregate, I'm curious what has entrepreneurship, in both its glorifying and agonizing moments, what has it
Yep.
taught you about life?
Ooh, nice deep question. I would say that entrepreneurship is a personal development engine disguised as a business endeavor. It's the opportunity to really create, to make an impact, to define your values and define what you really want, which has a first order impact on how you live every day, right? For me, my values are growth, contribution, freedom, being able to have loving relationships in my life, and not just with my friends and family, but with my coworkers, my partners, my investors, with the environment as an example. And I would say that that one thing that I didn't realize with business is that 80% of all business challenges are actually personal challenges, if not more, right? So instead of like, why is this person not doing their job? It's more or less turning that question to become introspective of, why do I have such a hard time holding people accountable who are older than me, or that are whatever, you fill in the blanks, right? It's more a personal challenge than anything else, which is pretty special. It's there's a lot of dynamics around imposter syndrome and putting yourself out there, and rejection and fear of failure, or fear of success, and that's what it's taught me about life.
Man, yeah. No, that gets really deep with breaking out of I mean, really, you have to overcome a lot in entrepreneurship, and that those experiences have essential life lessons embedded into them. But awesome, Daniel. Daniel, so thank you for your time here. You have a well of wisdom and rich experiences, so I appreciate you sharing many of those. I love listening to them. But yeah, with that, we can conclude here, and I'll mention any of the resources that Daniel mentioned in the show notes, and links to connect with Daniel on social platforms in case you want to get in touch, and also about Key, to learn more about Key. Awesome. With
Awesome.
that, Daniel, thanks for being on, and yeah, take care.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.